The ruined food truck was dragged into the town square on a rusted chain. One back wheel leaned sideways. The serving window was cracked clean across. The metal door hung open, banging softly in the wind. People started laughing before the cameras even turned on. Then Daniel Blake stepped onto the charity stage. He was the CEO's son, dressed in a tailored coat, smiling like a man giving away hope instead of scrap metal. He held up the greasy keys so every camera could see them. "Every man deserves a second chance," Daniel said. Then he dropped the keys into the hands of Samuel Price. The homeless veteran Blakewood had spent years pretending not to see. The crowd clapped. Samuel did not. He looked at the broken truck, then at the factory workers standing behind the barricades in their stained uniforms, watching their boss's son turn charity into a joke. Daniel leaned toward the microphone. Now no one can say Blake Foods doesn't give back. 3 weeks later, no one in Blakewood was laughing. The Blake Foods plant shut down after a contamination scandal. Hundreds of families lost their paychecks overnight. Children stood shivering outside the only kitchen still serving hot meals. The same broken food truck. Samuel had fixed the stove, patched the window, scrubbed the rust from the counters with hands that still carried the tremor of old wars. But when he lifted the lid from his first pot of soup, the steam carried something wrong. Not rotten meat, not spoiled vegetables. A sharp, metallic bite, like blood on a coin. Samuel froze. He had smelled that before, not in a kitchen, in a war zone. And as the line of hungry children stretched around the square, the old man everyone called useless realized the town had not been poisoned by accident. Someone had done it on purpose. 3 weeks earlier, Blakewood gathered in the town square to watch what the mayor called a charity ceremony. Samuel Price knew a show when he saw one. There were Blake Foods banners tied to the street lamps, 2 county news cameras, and a small stage covered in rented carpet. Behind it stood factory workers in stained uniforms, close enough to be seen on camera, but not important enough to be given seats. Richard Blake stood near the edge of the platform in a dark overcoat. He did not laugh when the truck arrived. He only glanced at his son, then at the reporters. Daniel Blake did not calculate anything. He enjoyed it. He called the broken vehicle a mobile opportunity initiative, and the mayor nodded as if that phrase had substance. Then Daniel announced Samuel's name with rehearsed warmth. "Samuel Price served this country," Daniel said. "Today, Blake Foods is giving him the tools to rebuild his life." Applause came quickly. Applause was easier than looking at Samuel directly. Samuel stood beside the platform in his patched army coat, his boots dark from the mud near the bus station. Everyone in Blakewood knew where he slept, and still acted surprised whenever they had to see him in daylight. Daniel placed the greasy keys in Samuel's palm. "Say something for the cameras," he whispered. Samuel looked past him. Near the worker barricade, a boy no older than 10 watched with a paper lunch bag pressed to his chest. He was not laughing. So Samuel gave the cameras nothing. He walked to the truck. Inside, the smell hit him first. Sour oil, mouse droppings, burned plastic. A rusted propane line sagged below the stove. The grease trap was black, and the serving window could cut a child's hand. When Samuel tapped the water tank twice, it answered with a hollow rattle. Dead, most people would have said. Samuel only listened. Old machines told the truth if a man did not insult them by rushing. By sunset, the stage was gone. Daniel's car had left. Richard Blake's black sedan had left without crossing the square to speak to Samuel. The food truck remained where they had dumped it. When Samuel tried the engine, it coughed once and died. 2 teenagers laughed from the curb. "Sell it for scrap, old man." Samuel tied a rope to the front bumper. It took him nearly 4 hours to pull the truck 6 blocks to the church lot. No one stepped out to help. Near midnight, the boy from the square appeared under a street lamp. He held out a dinner roll and a bottle of water. "My mom said you probably hadn't eaten," the boy said. "What's your name?" "Illy." Samuel took the roll, broke it in half, and handed one piece back. "Tomorrow, Eli," he said, "if this old truck still remembers how to breathe, I'll cook you something warm." Behind the church, Samuel worked through the night. He cleaned the propane line first, because fire punished pride faster than hunger did. He scrubbed the grease trap with baking soda and steel wool, patched the serving window with salvaged acrylic, and cleaned the diesel generator's fuel filter with a toothbrush. Pastor Ruth Coleman found him at dawn and stared at the mess. "Did you steal my baking soda?" "Borrowed it. Borrowing means I get it back." "You will. Less clean." She sighed, but she brought him coffee. For 3 weeks, Blakewood watched him rebuild the joke. Workers passed the church lot and shook their heads. Children slowed down to look. Daniel Blake drove past once in a silver SUV, laughed into his phone, and never stopped. Samuel did not ask anyone for permission to make the truck useful. He replaced the stove knobs, painted over the worst rust, and asked Pastor Ruth to write allergy across old index cards. "For what?" she asked. "For the children. We don't have children lining up." Samuel tightened a bolt beneath the counter. "Not yet." The first recall notice appeared on a Tuesday morning. By noon, the word voluntary had vanished from the news reports. By evening, state inspectors were at the Blake Foods gates. By the next morning, production had stopped. Then the paychecks stopped. Fear spread faster than the contamination. Workers put milk back at the grocery store because they needed gas. At the factory fence, people who had given 20 years to the same production floor waited to hear whether their lives had been paused or ended. On the third day, Samuel opened the serving window. The diesel generator coughed, kicked, and finally held. A square of warm light fell across the church lot. Pastor Ruth taped the allergy cards to the counter. Eli was first in line, holding his little sister's hand. Behind him came 20 children, then 40, then their parents, eyes lowered because accepting soup from a man they had once ignored hurt in a place pride could not cover. Samuel asked every child the same quiet question. "Any allergies I should know about?" By dusk, the line had reached the sidewalk. That was when Samuel lifted the lid from the pot and smelled the steam. The ladle froze in his hand. Beneath the carrots, onions, and chicken bones donated by the butcher, there was something else. Faint, sharp, metallic. His eyes moved to the water containers below the counter. One from the church tap, one from the hydrant near the square, one from the truck's own tank, rinsed and boiled twice. He dipped a cup into the broth and let the steam touch his face. The memory struck hard. A canvas kitchen in a war zone, blue water drums, men sick by morning because one auxiliary line had been flushed into the wrong tank. That same taste in the air before anyone believed the water had turned dangerous. Pastor Ruth stepped closer. "What is it?" Samuel looked beyond the children, toward the dark shape of Blake Foods. His voice stayed low. This didn't start with the food. For the first time since Daniel Blake had dropped those keys into his hand, Samuel Price looked afraid. By the fourth morning of the shutdown, Blakewood no longer sounded like a factory town. There was no mechanical hum from the production wing before sunrise. No trucks backing into the loading bays. No workers crossing Main Street with coffee in one hand and lunch pails in the other. At the front gate of Blake Foods, yellow regulatory notices had been taped to the glass doors. Temporary production hold. Pending contamination review. No unauthorized entry. Across the street, workers gathered in small groups, speaking quietly. Some had given 20 years to the same production floor. They knew every normal smell from that plant. Sugar heating, vinegar from the sauce room, steam from the sterilizers, wet cardboard after a summer delivery. This silence was different. This silence sounded like a company deciding who could be sacrificed first. Inside the executive conference room, Richard Blake stood at the head of a polished table while his town appeared on the wall-sized television. A news crew had filmed the line outside Samuel's truck. Children in winter coats, parents holding empty grocery bags. Pastor Ruth moving with a clipboard. Samuel handing out bowls, one at a time. The lower third headline made Richard's jaw tighten. Local families rely on homeless veteran after Blake Foods shut down. "That is the image they're going to use all week," said Victor Harlan. Of course, Victor sat halfway down the table, with one hand on a folder marked Internal Response. He was the chief operations officer, the man who knew the plant's machinery, schedules, staffing weaknesses, and insurance exposure better than anyone else in the room. Richard did not look away from the screen. "Those are our workers' children. They are also standing in front of a food truck with no visible county permit," Victor said. "If anyone gets sick there, the story becomes catastrophic." The company lawyer, Denise Ward, adjusted her glasses. "He's operating on church property. We need to know who supplied the water, where the ingredients came from, and whether he has any food handling certification." Richard turned from the television. "Are you suggesting we shut him down?" "I'm suggesting," Victor said, "that we move him." The word landed softly. That was how things happened at Blake Foods. No one said remove the poor from camera range. They said relocate the optics. "What do we know?" Richard asked. Denise opened her laptop. Initial complaints came from 3 counties: nausea, fever, metallic taste, some reported chemical odor. Affected products include soup bases, frozen meal kits, and 2 sauce batches. State Lab has not confirmed the source. Ingredients? Nothing conclusive. Production floor? Victor opened his folder before Denise could continue. The preliminary pattern suggests handling failure during late shift processing. We have sanitation logs, but there are compliance gaps. Hairnet violations, glove changes not recorded, 1 temperature check entered late. Richard looked at him. A late temperature check does not create a metallic taste. No, Victor said. But public confidence doesn't need chemistry. It needs a clear explanation. At the far end of the table, Mara Ellis sat with both hands around a paper cup. She was a maintenance technician, not an executive, and had only been invited because she had pulled sanitation wing records at 3 in the morning. She studied the batch list on the screen. Line 3A, sauce base. Line 4, C, frozen stew. Line 2B, shelf stable broth. Different products, different crews, different packaging rooms. But every affected batch had resumed after a clean-in-place cycle. CIP was supposed to be invisible when it worked. Stainless steel pipes cleaned themselves through timed flows of alkaline wash, acid rinse, hot water, and sanitizer. The system moved through valves, pumps, and programmed routes. If something went wrong there, it would not look like one careless worker. It would travel quietly through everything. Why do we have affected products from 3 separate lines? Richard asked. Victor answered too quickly. Shared sanitation staff, same late shift supervisor. Or shared water, Mara said. The room turned toward her. Victor's face stayed smooth, but Mara felt the warning in it. Richard narrowed his eyes. Explain. I'm not saying that's what happened, Mara said, but the batches all resumed after CIP cycles. If contamination entered through the auxiliary water feed, or if a flush routed wrong, multiple lines could be affected without the ingredients being the source. Victor closed his folder. With respect, Mara maintains equipment. She does not interpret contamination events. I maintain the equipment that moves the water, Mara said. For a moment, no one spoke. Richard asked, do we have flush sign-offs for those cycles? Denise clicked through the shared drive. Mara already knew the answer. Line 3A had a sign-off. Line 4C had a sign-off. Line 2B had a blank field where a name should have been. Victor leaned back. Clerical gap. Happens during emergency shutdown. It was blank before the shutdown, Mara said. This time Victor looked at her. Richard saw it. He also saw how quickly Mara lowered her eyes. Before he could ask another question, his phone buzzed. A new live feed showed a reporter outside the church lot. Behind her, Blake Foods' water tower rose over the line of hungry families. While Blake Foods executives remain inside closed meetings, the reporter said, one man is doing what the company has not. Richard set the phone face down. Send someone to talk to him. Victor nodded. Community relations can request that he move behind the church. Less traffic risk. Less media clustering. No threats, Richard said. Of course. By late afternoon, the request had become a polite warning. A woman from community relations arrived at the truck with a Blake Foods umbrella and a folder of printed concerns. Samuel listened as she explained pedestrian congestion, sanitation uncertainty, and public confusion during an active investigation. The company is willing to help you relocate to a safer area, she said. Samuel looked at the children walking from the workers' apartments. Safer for who? For everyone. The church lot is lit, Samuel said. There's a crosswalk. Kids can reach it without crossing the highway. The square is attracting cameras. That doesn't make it unsafe. The woman lowered her voice. Mr. Price, this situation is sensitive. Samuel reached for the next bowl. So is hunger. Across the lot, Mara stood beside her old pickup, pretending to check her phone. She had come because of the batch list. But the truth was simpler. She wanted to know whether the man from the news was performing charity or running a kitchen. Samuel was not performing. Clean ladle for each pot. Covered water containers. Allergy cards clipped in order near the window. Hot food kept hot. Cold donations separated in church coolers, marked with masking tape and time. Then Mara heard him ask Pastor Ruth, where did the water for the rice come from? Church tap. And the soup? Hydrant at the square. Boiled twice, like you said. Samuel nodded, but not with satisfaction. Mara stepped closer. You really think it's the water? Samuel turned. His eyes went not to her badge, but to the grease under one fingernail and the small burn mark on her sleeve. You work maintenance. Yes. At the plant, do your sanitation lines pull from the main feed or a separate auxiliary? Mara felt the food line blur around her. No reporter had asked that. No lawyer had asked that. The consultants had asked about ingredients, temperatures, and employee handling. This man, standing behind a repaired food truck, had asked about the line no one wanted to discuss. Both, she said carefully, depends on the cycle. Any service on the auxiliary line lately? Mara did not answer fast enough. Samuel set the water container down. That's a yes. She looked toward the factory. Then toward the waiting families. 2 nights before the first complaint, she said. There was a maintenance window at the side gate. But I can't find the work order. Samuel's expression did not change, but his hand closed slowly around the towel. And for the first time since the shutdown began, the real crack in Blakewood did not look like panic. It looked like a missing signature. Mara Ellis did not sleep that night. She sat in her pickup outside the church lot until the last child left with a covered bowl and Pastor Ruth shut off the string lights. Samuel cleaned without hurry. He rinsed ladles, wiped the counter, checked the propane valve twice, and poured leftover water into 3 separate containers. That detail kept Mara awake. He was separating sources. People who guessed did not separate sources. At 2:17 inches the morning, Mara drove back to Blake Foods. Her badge still worked, though the plant felt wrong without production noise. No conveyors, no steam vents. Only emergency lights and the distant footsteps of state inspectors. She went straight to sanitation. The maintenance board hung near the CIP control room behind a locked mesh screen. Each line had colored magnetic tags: blue for scheduled clean, green for completed flush, yellow for chemical verification, red for hold. Mara had built that board after a night supervisor mixed up 2 valve routes the year before. Line 3A had all 4 tags. Line 4C had all 4. Line 2B had blue, yellow, and red. The green flush tag was missing. Mara checked the clipboard below it. Line 2B. Final flush sign-off. The sheet was there. The signature box was blank. She photographed it, then opened the lower cabinet and took 3 ATP swabs. They were not meant to solve a scandal. They were meant to tell a tired worker whether residue remained on a surface that was supposed to be clean. A door closed behind her. Victor Harlan stood at the end of the corridor in a dark suit, with no hairnet, no shoe covers, and no reason to be in sanitation at that hour. Mara, he said, that area is under review. I know. Then you know pulling unauthorized records would complicate things. I was checking whether line 2B had a completed flush. Victor walked closer, slow enough to make it look harmless. That will be handled by the proper people. It should have been handled before production restarted. A small silence opened between them. Victor looked at the maintenance board. Go home, he said. You look tired. By morning, Mara was at the church lot before Samuel opened the truck. He was boiling water in a stock pot, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Pastor Ruth sorted donated bread behind him. The air smelled of onions, rain, and old diesel. Mara placed the ATP swabs in a folded printout on the counter. Samuel looked at them, then at her face. You found something. I found absence. That counts. She unfolded the printout. Line 2B has no final flush sign-off. The green tag is missing. The work order for the side gate service window is still gone. Samuel studied the sheet without touching it. Who signs the final flush? Sanitation supervisor. Sometimes maintenance, if there's a routing adjustment. Was there a routing adjustment? I don't know. That means yes. Mara almost smiled, but fear stopped it. Mr. Price, how do you know what to ask? Samuel turned 1 ATP swab over in his hand. I fed men in places where clean water mattered more than bullets. Pastor Ruth stopped sorting bread. In a fixed kitchen, Samuel said, people trust walls, pipes, labels. In the field, you trust sequence, source, storage, heat, contact, time. Break the sequence, and people get sick before anyone knows which prayer to say. He set the swab down. Once, a camp went down overnight. Everyone blamed the meat because it smelled worst. It wasn't the meat. A flush line crossed into a holding tank after chemical rinse. The water carried the mistake into everything that looked safe. Mara looked at the missing signature. That is what this looks like. No, Samuel said. This looks cleaner. An hour later, Pastor Ruth walked into Blake Foods headquarters with Samuel beside her. When the receptionist said Richard Blake was unavailable, Pastor Ruth looked toward the reporters visible through the front glass. Then I'll explain outside why his company tried to move hungry children away from cameras before asking why the water tastes like metal. Richard appeared in less than 4 minutes. He brought Denise Ward, Victor Harlan, and a consultant with a laptop. They met in a small, windowless conference room. A tray of untouched bottled water sat in the center of the table. Samuel did not sit until Pastor Ruth did. "You told my staff this didn't start with the food," Richard said. Samuel nodded. "Based on what?" "Smell, timing, symptoms, your batch spread." The consultant leaned back. "Sensory impressions are not evidence." "No," Samuel said. "They are warnings." Denise folded her hands. "Do you have formal food safety credentials?" "Expired." Victor gave a soft breath, almost a laugh. Richard heard it. "What credentials?" he asked. Samuel did not answer. Pastor Ruth did. "Army Quartermaster Corps, Field Feeding Operations, Emergency Sanitation, Disaster Relief Kitchens." He won't say it because men like him think surviving is not the same as bragging. The consultant glanced at his laptop, suddenly less bored. Victor's voice stayed smooth. "Military field experience does not qualify him to interpret a commercial contamination event." Samuel leaned forward. "Then let someone qualified answer one question." Richard waited. Samuel pointed to the batch list on the table. "Who signed off on the final flush after the CIP cycle on line 2B? No one spoke. The air system hummed above them. Denise looked at Richard. Richard looked at Victor. Victor opened his folder. "We are still reconciling some documents." "That was not the question," Samuel said. Richard turned toward Mara, who stood near the wall in her maintenance jacket. "Mara, there is no signature," she said. "The final flush box is blank. The green completion tag is missing from the board." The consultant sat forward. "On one affected line? Line 2B is the obvious one," Mara said. "But the other affected lines resumed in the same auxiliary feed window." Richard frowned. "Auxiliary feed window?" Mara moved to the whiteboard and drew 3 lines. Main water, sanitation loop, auxiliary feed. Then she marked the CIP cycle in blocks. During production, the lines pull through main process water. During CIP, they can route through auxiliary feed depending on pressure and chemical stage. If a valve is mispositioned, or if the wrong line opens after chemical rinse, residue can enter a production line without touching raw ingredients. Samuel took the marker and added one small arrow. "Not during cooking," he said. "Before it. While everyone thinks the line is clean." The consultant looked from Mara to Samuel. "That would explain multiple product categories." Richard's expression changed, not into trust yet, but into disciplined fear. Victor closed his folder. "Or, we are building a theory around a missing signature and a homeless man's memory." Pastor Ruth looked at him. "Careful." Samuel did not react. He reached into his coat and placed a small plastic bag on the table. Inside was a strip from the truck's temporary water filter, stained faintly gray along one edge. "I ran square hydrant water through this before serving," he said. "Church water stayed clear. Hydrant water left this." Denise leaned away. "Chain of custody?" "None that satisfies you," Samuel said. "Enough to tell you where to look." Richard stared at the gray stain. For the first time, he was not looking at Samuel's coat, beard, or worn boots. He was looking at the thing Samuel had brought. Not proof. Direction. Richard turned to Victor. "Pull the full CIP records, all affected lines. Valve position logs, flush confirmations, contractor access, and every side gate badge swipe for the 48 hours before the first complaint." Victor did not move. Richard's voice dropped. "Now." Samuel stood. "I am not your evidence locker," he said, taking the bag back. "You want answers, start with the water no one signed for." Then he walked out beside Pastor Ruth. Behind him, the room remained silent. Not because the crisis was solved, because for the first time, the man they had tried to move out of sight had moved the investigation. Richard Blake did not read Samuel Price's file until after midnight. By then, the lawyers had gone home, Victor's last email had arrived, and headquarters was quiet enough for Richard to hear the old building settle around him. On his desk sat the list he had ordered: CIP records, valve position logs, badge swipes, contractor access. None of it was complete. Victor's team had sent summaries instead of raw files, explanations instead of records. Richard knew the difference. He opened a separate browser tab and typed Samuel's name. The first results were small. A veterans charity mention, a church shelter newsletter, a county citation for sleeping near the bus station during a winter storm. Then, Richard found the article Victor had attached without comment. Disgraced Army food operations, Sergeant questioned after relief supplies vanish. The photo was grainy. Samuel looked younger, broader in the shoulders, standing beside a row of canvas field tents. His hair was still dark then. His eyes were the same. Richard read slowly. Flood zone. Emergency feeding site. Missing pallets. Improper inventory control. Civilian illness. Disciplinary review. The article gave numbers, but the numbers felt wrong. It claimed 6 pallets had disappeared from a relief depot, then said the missing food could have fed 800 people for one night. Richard had run factories long enough to know volume. 6 pallets of ration packs could feed more than that, unless the reporter had been handed a number meant to sound precise instead of true. On his screen, Samuel was a scandal. At the church lot, Samuel had been the only man asking where the water came from. The next morning, Samuel found the filtration unit while checking the truck's rear tank. It was hidden behind a warped aluminum panel near the pump housing. The casing was scratched, olive gray under layers of grease. With a faded manufacturer's code Samuel recognized before his fingers touched it. He stopped breathing for a moment. Pastor Ruth was unloading donated onions from her van. "What is it?" she asked. Samuel removed 3 screws. The panel came loose, with a dry scrape. Behind it sat a compact military-grade filtration unit, old but intact, the kind field kitchens used when city water could not be trusted and bottled water ran out by noon. Pastor Ruth stepped closer. "That was in there the whole time?" Samuel nodded. "Daniel Blake gave away a truck with that inside it?" "He gave away something he never bothered to understand." Samuel ran his thumb over the intake valve. The rubber gasket had cracked at the edge. The cartridge was old, not useless, not if flushed properly, not if handled carefully. He could rig it between the hydrant containers and the cooking tank, not as final proof, but as a warning system. Pastor Ruth watched his hands. They did not shake now. When Samuel worked with water, valves, heat, and sequence, his body remembered a different version of itself. His fingers checked seals in the same order every time. Intake, sediment screen, pressure release, cartridge lock, output line. He did not think through the list. He had survived by becoming the list. "You never told me much about what you did over there," Pastor Ruth said. Samuel kept his eyes on the gasket. "I cooked. For soldiers? For whoever was still standing." "That is not the same answer." The church lot was empty, except for wind-moving paper cups along the fence. No children, no cameras, no executives. Just the open truck and a piece of the past bolted inside its wall. Samuel said, "First thing they teach you is that hunger makes people careless. Second thing is that dirty water kills faster than hunger." Pastor Ruth waited. "We had a flood camp once, not the one in the article. Earlier, whole valley gone brown with river water. We set up canvas kitchens behind a school, 600 people the first day, more by night. Everyone wanted food. I kept telling them water first. Safe water first. Men hated me for it until the first child stopped vomiting." "And the article?" Pastor Ruth asked. Samuel's hand paused. "That came later." She did not push. Samuel's silences had doors on them, and most of those doors opened only from the inside. Across town, Richard walked the production floor with Mara Ellis. He had left his suit jacket in the office and put on a hairnet, shoe covers, and a visitor smock. Mara led him to line 2B, where stainless steel pipes ran overhead in clean, bright rows. That was the danger of a plant like this. A wrong route did not spill blood on the floor. It hid inside polished metal. Mara pointed to valves near the sanitation loop. Blue handle is main process water. White is auxiliary feed. Yellow tags indicate chemical stage. During CIP, the system should rinse through here, then final flush routes out before production resumes. Richard looked at the white-handled valve. Could someone misposition it by accident? Yes. Could someone make it look like an accident? Mara did not answer immediately. Yes, she said. By afternoon, Victor sent the raw files in a locked folder with restricted permissions. Richard's assistant could not open them. Denise could not open them. Mara's access had been suspended. Richard called Victor. "Why is Mara locked out?" "Standard protocol," Victor said. She pulled records outside the assigned review chain. She found what your review chain missed. She may also have contaminated the process by involving Samuel Price. There it was. Samuel's name had become a lever. Richard looked at the article still open on his second monitor. You sent me his military story. I sent you relevant risk, Victor said. A man with a documented history of lost relief supplies is now handling food, water samples, and public accusations against this company. And if he is right? Victor paused just long enough. Then we still need to control how right he is. At the church lot, Samuel cleaned the old filtration unit until the faded code showed through. Mara arrived near dusk. No badge on her jacket this time. They suspended my access, she said. Samuel kept working. That means you touched the right door. It means I may lose my job. He looked up. Do you want out? Behind her, Eli and his sister were helping Pastor Ruth fold napkins. The boy glanced over, then quickly looked down. No, Mara said. Samuel nodded once and passed her the cleaned cartridge housing. Then hold this steady. Water ran through the old unit in a thin stream, clear at first, then faintly gray against the white bucket below. Mara leaned closer. That's from the hydrant? Square hydrant. And church tap? Clear. So the town line near the plant is carrying residue. Maybe, Samuel said. Or something entered where that hydrant branches from the industrial feed. Mara looked at him carefully. How many kitchens did you run? Samuel watched the gray water settle. Enough to know the kitchen is never just the stove. That night, Richard printed the article about Samuel and marked the numbers in the margin. 6 pallets. 800 meals. Civilian illness. Improper control. Then he circled the dates. The report claimed the supplies vanished 2 days before the flood camp ran out of food, but the attached military notice said civilians had been fed on the missing inventory during those same 2 days. Richard stared at the contradiction. For the first time, Samuel's disgrace did not look like an explanation. It looked like a warning label pasted over a different story. And somewhere inside Blake Foods, Victor Harlan was already preparing to use it. The next morning, Samuel lined 4 glass jars on the food truck counter and labeled them with tape. Church tap. Square hydrant. Truck tank. Plant side fountain. Pastor Ruth watched him write the last label. You planning to start your own laboratory? No, Samuel said, just trying not to lie to myself. He filled the first 3 himself. The 4th came from a bottle Mara had brought in her coat pocket, filled from the drinking fountain beside the employee entrance before her badge was locked out. It was not a perfect sample. Samuel knew that. Mara knew that. Denise Ward would have torn it apart in half a sentence. But it was enough to compare smell, residue, and timing. Samuel ran each jar through a square of clean filter cloth, then through the old military cartridge he had rigged between 2 food-safe buckets. Church water left nothing. The truck tank left a faint rust stain, predictable from the old metal. The square hydrant left a gray trace along the cartridge edge. The plant-side fountain left the same gray trace, darker. Mara leaned over the bucket. That fountain branches from the industrial feed before the office split, she said. Samuel nodded. Then we stopped looking at soup. Across the lot, Eli sat on an overturned milk crate, peeling the paper from a donated orange. He had been quieter since adults started whispering about sickness and shutdowns. His father had worked packaging on Line 4C. Now the man spent mornings at the factory fence and afternoons pretending not to count the cash in his wallet. Eli looked at the jars. Is that why my dad says the water tastes like pennies? Samuel turned. When did he say that? Last week, before the news. He came home and told Mom the break room fountain tasted like pennies. Mara's face changed. Which break room? The one by the side gate? Eli said. He said they were fixing something back there. Samuel and Mara looked at each other. Eli kept peeling the orange. There was a white truck, too. Mara went still. A delivery truck? The boy shook his head. Like a water truck. No pictures on it, just white. It came when I was waiting for Dad after second shift. What night? Samuel asked. Eli shrugged, afraid now that he had everyone's attention. Samuel lowered himself onto a crate so he was not standing over the boy. You are not in trouble, he said. Just walk it backward. Was it raining? No. School night? Eli nodded. Before the plant closed? 2 nights before, Eli said. Because Dad bought me fries after. Then the next day Mom got mad because he spent money. Mara took out her phone, then remembered her access was gone. I need the side gate keypad log, she said. You said they locked you out. They locked me out of the live system, not the printer cache. That evening, Mara returned to the plant through the old maintenance entrance with her cousin's badge. She hated doing it. The badge belonged to a forklift driver who was home with a migraine and a wife who did not know Mara had asked for it. Inside, the plant smelled sterile and abandoned. Mara did not go near line 2B. She went to the maintenance office, where the side gate terminal still fed daily access summaries to a local printer nobody had bothered to disconnect. The paper tray held 3 wrinkled pages from the week before the shutdown. She photographed them quickly. Most entries were ordinary: pest control, refrigeration service, cardboard supplier, night security. Then she saw it. 2241 temp sanitation contractor access. No company name. No driver ID. No work order number. Just a temporary code issued for 1 gate opening and 1 exit 43 minutes later. The next morning, Mara met Samuel behind the church before sunrise. Eli was right, she said, handing him the photos. There was a temporary sanitation contractor at the side gate 2 nights before the first complaint. Samuel studied the paper. Who issued the code? Operations admin. Who controls operations admin? Mara did not have to answer. Victor. By noon, Richard had agreed to a restricted review in the closed factory cafeteria. Not plant access, not yet. Just printed records on a table, with Denise Ward watching every page as if paper could bite. Richard looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes now, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. It made him look less like the man from the charity stage, and more like someone learning that control was not the same as knowledge. I am allowing this because I need to know whether there is a real pattern, he said. Samuel looked at the 2 security guards by the door. You are allowing half of it. Richard's jaw tightened. You are not a Blake Foods employee. No, Samuel said. That is why I can still ask plain questions. Mara spread the batch schedules across the cafeteria table. She circled the affected products with a red pen: sauce base, frozen stew, shelf-stable broth. Then she added the CIP restart times. Samuel placed Eli's timeline beside the side gate log. White tanker. Temporary sanitation contractor. 43 minutes. Line 2B missing final flush. Richard stood behind them, silent. Mara tapped 1 column. Official samples were taken from finished product tanks in main process water. Samuel asked. Not the auxiliary feed? Denise answered before Mara could. State sampling follows standard procedure. Standard procedure follows standard mistakes, Samuel said. Richard looked at Mara. Would auxiliary feed be sampled automatically? No, she said. Not unless someone suspected routing contamination. And no one suspected it, Richard said. Victor had joined them late and remained near the cafeteria doors. Because there is no evidence for it, he said. We have speculation. An unauthorized gate printout. And a child's memory of a truck. Samuel picked up one of the filter strips. The gray stain had dried into a thin crescent. You also have residue from 2 water points closer to the plant and none from the church tap. Collected by you, Victor said. Samuel nodded. That is why you should collect your own. Richard turned to Denise. Can we order auxiliary line sampling? Denise hesitated. Yes, but if we open that path formally, we expand the scope of liability. Samuel laughed once, quietly. Everyone looked at him. He did not apologize. You have sick people in 3 counties, he said. The liability is already open. You are just deciding whether to look at it. Richard said nothing for several seconds. Then he took a pen and wrote on the top of the batch schedule. Auxiliary feed sample, all affected lines. Victor's mouth flattened. That was when Samuel noticed the second mismatch. He pulled the generator hour note from his coat, the one he had made after running the truck's filtration system. Then he pointed to the production timestamps. These batches resumed before the contractor exited the side gate. Mara leaned in. What? Samuel turned the side gate printout toward her. Gate exit at 23:24. Line 2B, restart at 23:11. That cannot happen, Mara said. No outside contractor should still be on site after restart. Richard's voice lowered. Could the log be wrong? Yes, Mara said. But if it is right, someone restarted production while the service window was still active. Samuel looked toward the closed production doors. And if the wrong valve was open, the line was not clean. It was connected. The cafeteria fell quiet. For the first time, The timeline was no longer a fog of symptoms, statements, and public fear. It had shape. A white tanker entered through the side gate. An auxiliary flush signature vanished. A line restarted too early. Residue appeared where no one had sampled. Richard stared at the papers as if they belonged to another company, another family, another man's name on the water tower. Then Victor stepped forward. "This is exactly why unauthorized people should not be allowed inside the process," he said. "You are turning confusion into accusation." Samuel gathered the copies slowly. "No," he said. "Confusion is what kept everyone polite." He looked at Richard. "Now you have a clock." The first attack came with a clipboard. It arrived just after sunrise, before the soup had warmed and before the children had reached the church lot. A county health inspector stepped out of a white sedan, with a temporary badge on his coat and a sealed complaint form in his hand. Samuel saw him first. He was rinsing, serving spoons in boiled water, sleeves rolled, the old filtration unit humming behind him. "Samuel Price?" the inspector asked. Samuel dried his hands on a clean towel. "Yes. I need to inspect this mobile food service operation." Pastor Ruth came out carrying donated apples. At 6:30 in the morning, the complaint alleges unsafe food handling, improper water storage, unpermitted public service, and possible contamination risk. "Who filed it?" Samuel asked. The inspector glanced at the form. "Anonymous. Anonymous wakes up early." The man ignored that and began his checklist. Victor Harlan had chosen the first weapon carefully. Not a lawsuit, not a public accusation, a clipboard. A small official humiliation dressed as concern. The inspector checked the propane connection, hand-washing station, covered water containers, cooler temperatures, donated food labels, and grease trap. Samuel answered each question without raising his voice. He showed the allergy cards, time marks on the coolers, boiled water log, and separate source containers. When the inspector asked for a mobile food permit, Pastor Ruth handed him a temporary charity service approval. The inspector frowned at the date. "This was approved yesterday." Pastor Ruth smiled without warmth. "I called every hour until they remembered hungry children count as urgent." The inspection did not shut the truck down. That was the problem. By 9 o'clock, the story had changed online. A local news blog posted a photo of the inspector beside Samuel's truck with the headline, "County Reviews Homeless Man's Food Operation During Blake Foods Crisis." The article did not say Samuel had passed. It said questions remained. That was enough. By noon, mothers who had trusted Samuel the night before stood farther back in line. Fathers whispered near the fence. One man took a bowl, smelled it, and asked whether the water had been tested by real people. Samuel handed it to him anyway. "Your daughter has a peanut allergy," he said. "This one is safe." The man's face tightened with shame, but he did not apologize. Shame rarely did. Across town, Richard watched the article from his office, while Denise Ward read the inspection result aloud. No critical violations. Minor recommendations only. Clearer ingredient labels, additional hand sanitizer station, written volunteer rotation. Richard looked up. "Then why does every headline make it sound like he poisoned someone?" Victor answered from the window. "Because uncertainty is news." "You filed the complaint?" Victor turned calmly. "No. But whoever did may have prevented a larger liability." Richard studied him, trying to decide whether the answer was denial or architecture. Then his assistant entered with a tablet. "You need to see this." The second attack did not arrive with a clipboard. It arrived with a headline from 21 years ago. By late afternoon, the old military article had been reposted by 3 accounts, then picked up by a regional station. "Disgraced veteran at center of Blakewood food safety questions." The photograph showed young Samuel beside canvas tents, his uniform clean, his eyes already carrying distance. Under it, the summary was simple enough to wound. Missing relief supplies, failed inventory control, civilian sickness, disciplinary review. No one mentioned the numbers that did not match. No one mentioned the flood dates. No one mentioned that the article had never included Samuel's side. A reporter waited outside the church lot until Samuel stepped down from the truck with an empty stockpot. "Mr. Price, is it true you were removed from military food operations after relief supplies disappeared under your supervision?" Pastor Ruth moved between them. "He is serving children." The reporter held the microphone past her. "The public has a right to know whether the person handling food and water samples has a history of negligence." Samuel looked at the microphone. Then, at the parents pretending not to listen. He could have defended himself. He could have told them about floodwater rising behind a school, about the buses that never came, about the decision no report had the courage to print. Instead, he took the stockpot back into the truck. The reporter turned to the camera. Samuel Price declined to answer. That sentence did more damage than any lie could have done alone. By evening, the line was half its usual length. Eli came anyway. His mother held his sister's hand and looked embarrassed by her own courage. She accepted 2 bowls from Samuel and whispered, "I don't believe everything they say." Samuel nodded. But Eli's eyes were wet. "Did you really lose food?" the boy asked. Samuel leaned on the counter so his face was level with Eli's. "Yes." "Why?" Samuel looked at the empty space where other children had stood the day before. "Because sometimes the place they tell you to take it is not where the hungry people are." Eli did not understand. Not yet, but his mother did. Her face changed, just a little. At Blake Foods, Victor used Samuel's silence like evidence. "He refuses to answer because there is no answer that helps him," he told Richard during an emergency call with legal, public relations, and the board chair. "We have a man with a documented food safety disgrace collecting informal samples, advising our technician, and influencing public perception." Richard stood at the end of the conference room table. "What are you recommending?" "Distance," Victor said. "We continue the internal review." But Samuel Price steps back. "No more contact with workers. No sample handling. No access to Blake Foods records through Mara Ellis. Mara is already locked out, and should remain so pending review." Denise added more gently, "Richard, a temporary separation protects everyone." Richard hated that sentence because it sounded reasonable. It also sounded like every mistake his father had ever made. That night, he went to the church lot himself. There were no cameras, no reporters, just cold wind, empty crates, and Samuel washing the counter after the last meal. The truck's side light flickered over the dents Daniel's joke had left behind. "Mr. Price," Richard said. "Mr. Blake, the situation is becoming complicated. It was complicated before you noticed." Richard let that pass. "I need you to step back from the investigation for a few days." Samuel rinsed a towel and hung it over the handle. "Need?" "Yes." "Or prefer?" Richard's jaw tightened. "You are being attacked publicly. The company is being attacked publicly. Mara's job is at risk. If you keep inserting yourself, Victor will make this about you instead of the plant." Samuel finally looked at him. "Victor already made it about me because the plant points back to him." "You do not know that." "No," Samuel said. "I know he wants me quiet more than he wants the water tested." For a moment, Richard had no answer. Samuel stacked clean bowls inside the truck. "You can tell your people I will not enter your plant. I will not touch your records. I will not speak for your company." "That would help. But I will keep feeding children," Samuel said. "And if the water tells me something, I will listen." Richard looked toward the dark factory, where the water tower stood with his family name painted across it. "You make this sound simple." Samuel closed the serving window halfway. "It is simple, not easy." Then he reached through the gap and handed Richard a folded index card. Richard opened it. A list of children's allergies. Names: peanut, dairy, shellfish, red dye, antibiotic reaction. One child needed food soft enough for a loose tooth. "What is this?" Richard asked. "What your company did not ask." The words did not accuse loudly. They did not need to. When Richard returned to headquarters, Victor was waiting in the lobby. "Did he agree?" Victor asked. Richard looked at him. "To stop feeding children?" "No." Victor's expression cooled. "Then we prepare for the next risk." Richard walked past him toward the elevator. Behind him, Victor took out his phone and sent a message with no greeting. "Release the full file." Richard chose the closed factory cafeteria because it was the one room in Blake Foods that still smelled like people. The production floors smelled sterile now, scrubbed and silent under regulatory hold. The conference rooms smelled like coffee, legal pads, and fear. But the cafeteria still carried traces of lunch trays, plastic chairs, and workers who used to sit there before dawn with their names stitched on their shirts. Samuel noticed that first. A long table had been cleared near the vending machines. On it sat a folder, a bottled water, and a set of keys to a company storage unit. Denise Ward stood near the wall with a notepad. Daniel Blake sat 2 tables away, present because Richard had insisted his son learn what damage looked like without cameras. Samuel came alone. Richard pointed to the chair. Please sit. Samuel remained standing. Say it first. Richard took a breath. We can help you. That is usually how men start when they want to buy the end of a sentence. Daniel looked up. Nobody is trying to buy you. Samuel turned toward him. You already tried giving me away. The words landed hard enough to change Daniel's face. Richard raised a hand before his son could answer. This is not about the ceremony. It started there. It started years before that, Richard said. That made Samuel look back at him. Richard opened the folder. Inside were draft permits, supply agreements, a temporary kitchen license application, and a proposed partnership statement with Blake Foods letterhead. We can make the truck legitimate, Richard said. County permit, refrigerated storage, fuel, staff, safer location closer to the worker apartments. You would not have to depend on donated scraps and an old generator. Samuel looked at the papers. Sounds generous. It is practical. Practical has teeth. Denise stepped forward. There would be conditions. Public communication would go through Blake Foods and the church jointly. No independent claims about contamination until state testing is complete. No discussion of internal plant records. No informal sample collection. Samuel nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. There it is. Richard's jaw tightened. You are making claims that could affect thousands of jobs. Your water already affected them. We do not know that. You know enough to test it. We are testing it. Then release the auxiliary line order. Denise answered. We cannot release internal documents during an active investigation. Samuel looked at Richard, not Denise. Who signed the Sidegate contractor code? Richard did not answer. Who ordered the valve position files locked? Still nothing. Samuel placed 2 fingers on the folder and pushed it back. You do not want me safer. You want me quieter. For a moment, the only sound was the vending machine humming. Richard looked older than he had at the charity event. Not kinder, just less certain that authority could hold the walls together. My father built this plant, he said. Before the plant, this town had 3 closed mills and a rail yard full of weeds. People forget that. Samuel looked around the cafeteria. People remember paychecks. They also remember what paychecks cost. Richard's eyes sharpened. When I was 26, he said, there was a complaint from the sauce room. Workers said the ventilation system failed during sanitation. My father called it union noise and buried it in legal review. 3 months later, a man collapsed on the floor. Denise looked at Richard as if he had opened a locked door. Samuel did not move. Did the man live? Yes. Did the complaint? Richard looked down. No. The silence changed. It was no longer business silence. It had weight in it. My father taught me that public panic kills companies, Richard said. He believed truth had to be managed until it could be survived. And what do you believe? Richard looked at the folder between them. I believe if Blake Foods collapses, this town collapses with it. Samuel nodded. That is fear talking in a suit. Daniel stepped closer. If this company dies, nobody eats. Samuel turned to him slowly. When you gave me that truck, you wanted applause for throwing away garbage. Now you want credit for discovering hunger after the cameras found it. Daniel's face went red. Richard said his son's name once, Low. Samuel picked up the bottled water from the table and read the label. Brought in from out of county, he said. Even here, you do not drink what comes through your own pipes. Richard looked at the bottle as if seeing it for the first time. Samuel set it down. I will take donated food. I will take fuel if Pastor Ruth logs it. I will take volunteers if they wash their hands and write their names. But I will not sign a paper that tells me hunger is public and truth is private. Denise softened her voice. Refusing structure may hurt the people you want to help. Structure did not hurt them, Samuel said. Secrecy did. Richard walked to the cafeteria window. Beyond the glass, production lights shone over machines that were not moving. His family name was on the gates, the water tower, the employee checks, the recall notices, and now the fear in every house along the worker blocks. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. If I release the wrong thing too early, Victor and the board can remove me before I can fix any of it. Samuel heard the truth in that. He also heard the excuse. Then maybe you have less power than your name suggests. Richard turned back. That is easy to say when you own nothing. Samuel picked up his coat. I own what I refuse to sell. He started toward the door. Daniel spoke behind him, no longer mocking. Why didn't you tell the reporter your side, about the army thing? Samuel stopped. Because the children in that flood camp had been undocumented. Because command had ordered all supplies held for a registered site 2 miles away, while families were trapped in a school gym with no clean water. Because Samuel had moved the food where hunger actually was, then signed the inventory loss himself when they needed one name to punish. He said none of that. Some stories get smaller when you use them to defend yourself. Then he left. On the table, Samuel had left the partnership folder untouched, but he had also left the bottled water turned so the label faced Richard. Out of county, not Blakewood, not the plant, not the pipes everyone else was supposed to trust. Victor was waiting outside the cafeteria near the dark hallway to sanitation. He had not been close enough to hear every word, but he had seen Samuel leave with the papers unsigned. He refused? Victor asked. Richard did not answer. Victor's eyes moved to the folder. Then he has chosen to remain uncontrolled. Richard looked at him. That is not the same as dangerous. It becomes the same when the public cannot tell the difference. A maintenance alert pinged on Victor's phone. He glanced at it and turned the screen away too quickly. Richard saw the movement. What is that? Routine replacement order. For what? Victor smiled without warmth. A valve assembly already tagged for review. We cannot leave compromised equipment in place forever. Richard stepped closer. Do not replace anything tied to line 2B without legal present. Of course. But later that night, Mara received a photo from a worker still inside the plant. A printed order taped near the service yard. Auxiliary valve assembly removal, 6 a.m. She called Samuel once. He did not answer. She called again. This time, when he picked up, she said only one thing. They're taking the valve before sunrise. Samuel reached the service yard before the sky changed color. The church lot was still dark behind him. Pastor Ruth had not woken yet. The food truck sat cold, its serving window locked, its old filtration unit wrapped in a towel beneath the counter. For once, Samuel left the stove untouched. Mara waited beside the east fence in a gray hoodie, her hair tucked under a cap. She looked younger without her Blake Foods badge and more frightened because of it. You should not be here, Samuel said. You should not have answered the phone. She held up her phone. On the screen was the photo from the worker inside. Auxiliary valve assembly removal 6A, M. Below it, in smaller print, was the service yard location and Victor Harlan's authorization code. Samuel read it twice. Legal present? He asked. No. State inspector? No. Then they are not removing equipment. They are erasing sequence. Mara handed him a disposable coverall and a pair of shoe covers. I can get us to the outer service yard, not inside production. The valve assembly is staged near the sanitation loop before removal. If we photograph the tag, the pipe orientation, and the residue on the gasket, it may be enough to force them to preserve it. Maybe. It is what we have. Samuel looked toward the factory wall. Motion lights glowed over the loading dock. A camera turned slowly above the gate, pausing at the same 3 angles. Where is the blind spot? Mara stared at him. What? You would not have called me unless there was a way in. She swallowed. There is a camera delay behind the old pallet shed, 20 seconds when it resets. Samuel shook his head once. That is not a blind spot. That is a trap someone forgot to label. But he put on the coverall. They moved when the camera turned away. Mara unlocked the pedestrian gate with a contractor code she had memorized from the printer cache. Samuel noticed she did not use her cousin's badge this time. No badge meant no direct name. It also meant no protection if they were caught. The service yard smelled of wet concrete and chemical rinse. Stacked pallets cast long shadows under the sodium lights. Near the sanitation access door, the auxiliary valve assembly sat on a rolling cart, already disconnected from the line, its white handle wrapped in plastic. Samuel stopped 10 feet away. Do not touch it yet. Mara froze. What? Look at the floor. A thin crescent of water had dried beneath the cart, leaving a pale gray edge against the concrete. Not much. Enough. Samuel took out his old phone and began photographing from a distance. Wide shot first. Door, cart, floor. Work order taped to the wall. Then closer. Valve handle, pipe label, gasket, plastic wrap, gray residue. Mara took photos too, faster, less steady. Hurry, she whispered. Samuel looked at the pipe label. Ausfeed, Sonlo B. The tag had been turned backward. He reached for it with 2 fingers, then stopped. Instead, He used the edge of a clean plastic spoon from his coat pocket to flip it forward. Mara almost laughed despite herself. "You brought a spoon? I brought something I could throw away." The tag showed the original orientation mark. It did not match the position of the handle. Mara's face went white. That valve was not in rinse position. "No," Samuel said. "It was open to feed." A metal door slammed somewhere inside. Mara grabbed his sleeve. "We have to go." Samuel did not move. He looked at the gasket again. In the crack near the rubber seal, a small smear of gray-white residue clung like dried paste. He took out one of the ATP swabs Mara had given him days earlier. "No," Mara said. "Samuel, if you touch it. If they take it, it becomes clean by noon. If you touch it, they will say you contaminated it." Samuel looked at her. "They are already saying that." He opened the swab packet carefully, touched only the residue at the gasket edge, and sealed it inside the tube. Then he placed the tube in a small paper envelope and wrote the time on it, 5:02 a.m. Behind them, floodlights snapped on. "Step away from the equipment," a voice shouted. 2 security guards came from the loading dock. Behind them walked Victor Harlan in a dark coat, holding his phone as if he had been expecting a call and received a performance instead. Mara whispered, "How did he?" Samuel put the envelope in his coat pocket. Victor's eyes followed the movement. "Mr. Price," he said, "you are trespassing on restricted property during a contamination investigation." Samuel said nothing. Victor turned to Mara. "And you are suspended, Miss Ellis. You no longer have authorization to be here." "You ordered evidence removed without legal present," Mara said. "I ordered compromised equipment replaced to protect the plant. At 6 in the morning? At the earliest safe opportunity." One guard stepped toward Samuel. "Empty your pockets." "No," Samuel said. Victor smiled faintly. "Then we will let the police handle it." The police were not called. That was how Samuel knew Victor wanted images more than charges. By 7:30, a cropped security clip was online. It showed Samuel entering the service yard, approaching the valve, moving the tag with the spoon, and using a swab on the gasket. It did not show the work order. It did not show the dried residue on the floor. It did not show the backward tag before he moved it. The caption spread faster than the truth could walk. "Homeless food truck operator caught tampering with Blake Foods equipment." At the church lot, parents pulled children away from the line. One woman returned a covered bowl as if it had become dangerous in her hands. Pastor Ruth stood beside Samuel while reporters shouted questions from the sidewalk. "Did you plant evidence? Were you trying to frame Blake Foods? Did Mara Ellis help you break in?" Samuel kept the serving window closed. Inside the truck, Eli watched from behind a stack of bread crates. His sister clutched his sleeve. "My dad says we should not come anymore," Eli whispered. Samuel crouched in front of him. "Then you listened to your father." "But did you do it?" Samuel looked at the boy's frightened face and hated Victor for placing that question there. "I tried to keep something from disappearing," he said. Eli nodded, but children could not carry adult certainty for long. At headquarters, Richard watched the clip 3 times. Each time, he saw something different. First, a trespass. Second, a desperate man touching equipment he should not touch. Third, a gap. The timestamp jumped 11 seconds just before Samuel reached the cart. Richard rewound. There it was again, a small skip in the upper right corner. Denise stood beside him. "It is still damaging." Victor stood near the door. "Damaging is generous. He has compromised any evidentiary value that Valve Assembly had." "Where is the original footage?" Richard asked. Victor did not blink. "With security. I want it." "Richard, even if there is a longer file, the facts are clear." Richard turned. "I asked for the original footage." Victor's voice cooled. "And I am advising you to separate the company from Samuel Price immediately." Before Richard could answer, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It contained one photograph, the valve tag before Samuel moved it, backward. Beneath it, Mara had written, "He touched it because I froze." Richard stared at the picture. Then another message came. 5:41 a.m. Work order posted. No legal, no inspector, no preservation seal. Richard looked back at the paused video. Samuel's face on the screen was grainy, tired, and cornered. Victor had finally made the story simple enough for the public. The man feeding the town was now the man accused of poisoning its evidence. And for the first time, Richard understood that silence was not neutral. It belonged to whoever edited the tape. The false lab report arrived at 8:06 the next morning. It came through Denise Ward's inbox first, then Victor's, then Richard's, as if truth itself had learned corporate routing. The header carried the name of a private testing firm Blake Foods had used for years. The conclusion was only 3 lines long. Residue recovered from the Blakewood auxiliary system showed a chemical profile consistent with residue found in Samuel Price's mobile food unit. Possible cross-contamination source. Unauthorized external food operation. Recommended action. Immediate suspension of public meal service pending full review. Richard read it twice before his office door opened. Victor entered without knocking. "I am sorry," he said. Richard looked up. "Are you?" Victor placed a printed copy on the desk, already highlighted. "We warned him. We warned everyone. Now we have a truck, operated by an unlicensed civilian, handling questionable water, inserting himself into an active investigation, and matching residue. Matching how? The lab says consistent. That is not the same as identical. It is enough for the county." He was right. By noon, a county order was taped to the food truck's serving window. Temporary closure. Samuel stood in front of it with his hands at his sides. Behind him, Pastor Ruth held a box of bread she was no longer allowed to serve. Children waited at the edge of the lot, confused by the silence where the generator should have been. A few workers did not hide their anger. "My kid ate from here," one man shouted. "You told us it was safe." Samuel looked at him. "I believed it was." "That isn't good enough." No, Samuel thought. It never was when poor people were asked to trust whatever was handed to them. Eli stood behind his mother, eyes fixed on the closure notice. He did not come closer. That hurt more than the shouting. At Blake Foods, Richard sat in a private call with the board chair, Denise, Victor, and a representative from the investment group that had suddenly offered to buy the unused east acreage beside the plant. The proposal was simple. Accept worker handling responsibility, settle with regulators, reopen 2 production lines, sell the land to raise emergency capital, and separate publicly from Samuel Price. "The town needs the plant open," the board chair said, "not a moral crusade." Richard looked at the settlement packet. Every page seemed designed to end the story before the truth could enter it. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Mara. "Ask Samuel for his generator hours." Richard stared at it. "What is it?" Denise asked. "Delay the vote," Richard said. Victor's expression sharpened. "Richard, delay it." At the church lot, Samuel unlocked the truck after everyone left. The inside was cold. Without the stove running, it looked like what Daniel had meant it to be. Scrap metal with wheels. Mara arrived through the alley carrying a folder under her jacket. "They used your truck as the source," she said. "I heard. They are wrong. Wrong does not matter unless it can stand up." Samuel opened the lower cabinet and pulled out a stained notebook. Pastor Ruth had made fun of it the first week because every page was filled with time, temperature, water source, fuel use, and serving count. He laid it on the counter. Generator started 5:18 p.m. First boil 5:46. First meal served 6:11. Mara flipped through the pages. "The private lab says your unit contaminated the water before affected batches left the plant." Samuel reached behind the tank and removed the old filtration cartridge, sealed now in a clean plastic container. "This cartridge caught gray residue before the first public meal. I logged it when I flushed the hydrant water." "What time?" 4:32 p.m., 3 days after the plant shut down. Mara shook her head. "That only proves the truck caught residue after the scandal." "No," Samuel said. "Look at the cartridge sequence." He opened a smaller envelope. Inside were 2 strips of filter cloth, each labeled in Pastor Ruth's careful handwriting. "Church tap clear. Square hydrant gray." The dates were before the county closure, before the service yard incident, before the lab report. Mara's breath caught. The truck did not produce the residue. It separated sources. Samuel nodded. "And if their report says the truck residue matches the auxiliary system, then the auxiliary system matches water outside the plant, meaning the contamination path moved outward, or was flushed outward after it moved through the plant." Mara took out the backup keypad log she had risked everything to get. "There is more. The temporary contractor code was not only used at the side gate, it pinged once at the old East Service Road." Samuel looked at her. "The road by the land they want to sell?" She nodded. That was when Eli appeared at the open door. His mother stood several steps behind him, uncertain. "I remembered the truck," Eli said. Samuel came down from the food truck slowly. The white tanker. Eli nodded. It was white because someone painted over it, but on the back, under the paint, there was a shape, like a circle with waves. Mara's face tightened. She opened her phone and searched through old contractor photos from archived maintenance emails. She found it on the fourth try. A disaster relief water contractor. A circle with 3 blue waves. The same faded shape Eli had seen. Samuel looked at the image, then at the old filtration unit inside his ruined truck. Field kitchens, relief water, painted over tanker, auxiliary valve, east acreage, false lab report. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were pointing. Richard arrived 10 minutes later, alone, without a driver. Samuel handed him the notebook first, then the cartridge record. Then Mara handed over the backup log. Eli, barely tall enough to see over the counter, pointed to the faded decal on Mara's phone. Richard read everything without speaking. When he finished, Samuel said, "Your report is not false because it found a match. It is false because it tells the match backward." Richard looked up. Samuel tapped the cartridge container. "This truck did not contaminate your plant. It caught what your plant pushed into the town." For a moment, Richard looked as if the ground beneath Blakewood had opened under his own feet. Then his phone rang. "Denise," he answered on speaker. "The board is reconvening in 30 minutes, she said. "Victor is moving to approve the settlement without your delay." Richard looked at the closed truck, the hungry children waiting across the lot, state, and the old veteran everyone had tried to turn into the source of the poison. His voice changed. "Tell them I'm bringing the evidence." Victor had built his final attack to bury Samuel. Instead, he had forced Samuel to prove where the poison had traveled. The emergency meeting was held inside the closed packing warehouse, where the conveyor belts had been stopped and covered with plastic sheeting. Workers filled the folding chairs first. Then came reporters, board members, county officials, and the investment representatives in dark coats. At the front, Victor Harlan stood beside a projector screen showing the words, "Reopening Plan." Richard arrived with Samuel, Mara, Pastor Ruth, and Eli. The room changed when Samuel walked in. Victor smiled into the microphone. "Before we begin, Mr. Price is not part of this company's authorized investigation." Richard took the microphone from him. "He is now part of mine." A murmur moved through the warehouse. Richard placed Samuel's notebook on the table. Mara added the backup keypad log. Pastor Ruth set down the sealed filtration cartridge. Eli stood beside his mother, holding her hand with both of his. Victor pointed to the screen. "We have a settlement path that reopens this plant, protects jobs, and ends public confusion." Samuel looked at the workers. "Confusion is what they sold you." Mara projected the sidegate log. A temporary sanitation contractor entered at 10:41 p.m. and exited at 11:24. Line 2B restarted at 11:11. Production resumed while the service window was still active. A county official leaned forward. "That should not happen." "It did," Mara said. Victor cut in. "Those logs were obtained improperly." Richard turned to the official. "Then subpoena them properly. They will say the same thing." Samuel opened his notebook. "The false report says my truck matched the auxiliary system. It did not lie about the match. It lied about the direction." He held up 2 filter cloths. Church tap stayed clear. Square hydrant showed residue. Plant side fountain showed more. The truck did not create the residue. It separated the sources. Pastor Ruth lifted the sealed cartridge. This was logged before the county closed the truck, before the service yard video, before that private report. Then Richard projected Mara's photo. The auxiliary valve tag turned backward before Samuel touched it. The room went quiet. Samuel pointed to the photo. That valve was not in rinse position. It was open to feed. Victor's voice sharpened. "You are letting a disgraced veteran explain industrial sanitation to frightened workers." Richard stepped closer to the microphone. "No. I am letting the man who kept our workers' children alive show us what my executives missed." Mara changed the slide. A white tanker appeared, pulled from an archived contractor photo. Its faded decal showed a circle with 3 blue waves. Eli leaned toward the microphone. "That's the mark," he said. "It was painted over, but I saw it on the back." Victor laughed once. "A child's memory is not evidence." Richard clicked to the final slide. A corporate ownership chain. The disaster relief water contractor. A Shell sanitation vendor. The temporary side gate code. the investment group offering to buy the East Acreage, all connected through one holding company. The warehouse became so still the stopped machines seemed to be listening. Richard looked at Victor. You engineered a contamination crisis, blamed my workers, tried to frame Samuel Price, and pushed me to sell land to the company standing behind your contractor. Victor's face changed for the first time. You cannot prove intent. Maybe not today, Samuel said. Richard faced the county officials. Seal line 2B, the auxiliary feed, the valve assembly, the side gate logs, and every contract tied to the East Acreage. Blake Foods will cooperate publicly. No settlement, no land sale, no worker blame. The workers did not cheer at first. They were too tired for quick joy. Then Eli's father stood. He removed his Blake Foods cap, walked to Samuel, and held it against his chest. My boy ate because of you, he said. One by one, other workers stood. Victor stepped back from the microphone, but there was nowhere left for him to hide. Richard turned toward Samuel in front of the town. Mr. Price, I was wrong to ask you to be quiet. Samuel looked at the workers, the sealed cartridge, and the boy beside his mother. Then do not say it to me. Richard faced the room. We were wrong to ask the truth to wait. 3 days later, Richard Blake stood outside the factory gate without a podium. No banner, no charity language, no cameras arranged by the company. Only workers, families, county officials, and the ruined food truck parked beside the fence with its closure notice removed. Richard read from one page. Blake Foods withdraws every statement suggesting worker error caused this crisis. Mara Ellis is reinstated. Samuel Price is cleared of tampering allegations. The auxiliary feed system, valve assembly, contractor records, and East Acreage contracts have been turned over to state investigators. He stopped reading. His eyes moved to the workers. We tried to manage shame before we faced truth. That failure is mine. Daniel stood beside him, pale and silent. No one applauded. But no one walked away. That was the first honest thing Blake Foods had earned in years. A week later, Daniel came to the church lot with the food truck keys in his hand. This time there were no microphones. The truck had been repaired, but Samuel had refused to let them make it shine. Some dents remained. The serving window still carried a thin scar through one corner of the new glass. Along the side, painted in steady black letters, were the names of volunteers, workers, and children who had kept the kitchen alive. Daniel held out the keys. I thought I was giving away garbage, he said. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. No, you were showing everyone what you thought people were worth. Daniel lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. Samuel took the keys. Then learn, before you give again. Months later, the first night shift returned to Blake Foods, under new safety rules, independent water testing, and a worker committee with authority to stop a line. Near midnight, the food truck rolled beside the employee entrance, under its own engine. Not because the town was starving, because Samuel had decided no child should have to wait for disaster before adults remembered to feed them. Eli came first, holding a dinner roll wrapped in a napkin. My mom said you probably hadn't eaten, he said. Samuel broke it in half and handed one piece back. Behind them, the factory lights came on, one row at a time. The truck that had entered Blakewood on a rusted chain now stood with its windows glowing. This time, nobody laughed.